Hi everyone, thank you very much for stopping by and returning to the old world. On the back of one of my recent videos looking at how the FAQ and errata for Warhammer the Old World has changed specific units, there has been a question about detachments. Are they worth taking? Are they any good? And the consensus does seem to be absolutely they are. So I thought I'd have a look at this in a little bit more detail. Across this video then we'll have a look at what detachments are, what options are available to you as an Empire of Man player, and how detachments could be useful as we enter a brave new world of what is effectively Warhammer 1.5. So what are detachments? What we're looking at here is a combination of units working closely together. So you have a parent unit with the regimental unit rule, and that allows you then to take up to 2 detachments to support that unit. Each of those units must have the detachment rule. One of the things to bear in mind is you are allowed to have each detachment up to 50% of the strength of the parent unit. So given that in the context of the Empire, we are looking at an army that's heavily set around really a Renaissance period army. So it's not quite pike and shot, but it's on its way to that. Kind of is a thematic way of representing your pike block and your early support from handguns, for example, which was used. It's not exact, but it kind of feels that way from a thematic perspective. The way detachments work is they are deployed at the same time as that parental regimental unit and have to be in close proximity. Once they're on the table, they act independently, although you do get bonuses if they stay together and work closely on the battlefield. So there's some advantages here already. One, if you've got a lot of big guns and you really want that first turn, or the +1 to getting that first turn, you've got your regimental unit and its detachment all going down as 1 drop. So that reduces the number of units you are placing individually on the field to help minimize the number of drops and get that +1. Working together, what can the regimental units do with their detachments? Well, it depends what really your detachments are armed with. They could be state missile troops, in which case they can offer a standard shoot reaction if the main unit is charged, and any casualties being caused there go to the combat resolution in the main fight. If they're armed with melee weapons, then they can also launch a countercharge, so they could potentially offer a flanking threat, getting that +1 should they survive to the end of the fight to your combat resolution. Now, there's a few things that are changed here which make this a little bit more interesting as well. So if you're being charged by a unit into your main block of infantry and you then flank charge as a counteraction with your detachment, my understanding is that the charging unit will only count as charging your main block. They will not count as charging and get the charging bonuses against the detachment because they didn't charge that unit. That means that they are less susceptible, if you're fighting cavalry, for example, to getting absolutely flattened before they can even swing and try and do a little bit of damage. So, what are the options available to you? There's actually quite a lot. I was originally thinking in terms of state troops, state missile troops, but there is more to it than that. So, what is it you can actually field as detachments? Well, yes, you've got state troops and veteran state troopers. And if you're using the Grand Composition Army, these come with all of the options that you would expect to see in a normal army. So they can be swords and boards, they can be halberds, they can be spearmen. As this is probably going to be an aggressive counterpunch, then I would suspect what we'd expect to see if you're using state troopers as a detachment or both detachments, them to be equipped with halberds. They may or may not have shields, depending on how much you care about their survivability and possibility of being shot off by small arms fire. That, of course, being a risk when we look at them operating in a wider battlefield environment. Should be noted, if you are null, there are restrictions on what the state troops can be armed with, so you're looking at sword and board in that sort of environment. Turning now to state missile troops, these can be equipped with crossbows or handguns. You could also take a detachment of archers as well, which, although a separate entry, they're kind of in the same sort of vein. Now, it makes sense thematically to have a unit of firearms as a detachment, but I think overall effectiveness, they're not going to be doing a lot. When it comes to small arms fire, you're probably looking at wanting to throw a big sack full of dice. And with the size restrictions on state missile troops being used as detachments, I don't think that's going to happen. So the odds are you're going to get, what, probably 5 or 6 shots off, hitting on 5 or more. That's what, 2 hits. If we're assuming a crossbow or a handgun, maybe 1 hit that wounds. If it gets through armor, you're getting 1 point towards that combat. If you're fortunate, you might get 2. We're talking really, really low numbers here. And I think 2 is probably unlikely. So I don't think they're offering great value, whether it be archers, whether it be state missile troops. The other option we've got is the Free Company Militia. Now, these units are equipped with mixed weapons, which count as 2-hand weapons and throwing weapons. This offers a slightly different melee threat, or indeed a stand and shoot threat if you really want to use the missile weapons instead. Don't think that's a great play, if I'm honest. But it's a different melee threat to your halberdiers, because this gives you volume. You're getting that +1 attack, so 2 attacks each as opposed to 1 attack. Are you really wanting that, though? How many enemy forces are really going to be particularly susceptible to extra attacks over the advantage of a halberd? What are you looking at? You're looking at 2 weapon skill, 3 strength, 3 attacks. So hitting on 4s, wounding, most of the time that is, wounding on at best 4s, if not 5s or 6s, against halberds. Sure, less attacks, half the number of attacks, but if you're veteran state troops, you're looking at weapon skill 4, so you're hitting your opponents on 4s, possibly 3s. Your strength 4, so you're getting into toughness 3 on a 3+ as opposed to a 4+. You've got some armor penetration because you've got that AP of 1 and access to armor bane. In fact, if you've charged, your AP 2, so you're cracking even more armor. Yes, the Free Company Militia, they're coming in cheaper than a veteran state trooper because you're paying 6 points instead of 8 points for a veteran state trooper with a halberd. But I really don't think that point makes an awful lot of difference. In fact, you're looking at the same price point for a Free Company Militia detachment as you are a regular state troop militia unit armed with halberds. So I don't think they offer particularly great value. These are all the traditional roles for detachments, but we've got to remember there is more. We are looking at a battlefield-wide engagement. And we're moving into a world where we as Empire players, I think, are starting to think about big, chunky blocks of infantry with a lot of static res that want to hold objectives and weather the storm. Break charges crashing into them, and in the subsequent rounds of combat, that's when you're doing your damage, that's when you're trying to push those enemy units back. Why is this relevant? Well, despite all of the emphasis that's being put on infantry and the like at the moment, there is a special rule that is still very damaging to infantry. If we look at our classic block, say it's armed with halberds, shields, and hand weapons, we've got our 3 ranks deep, 2 from the usual rules, 1 from Horde, giving us 3 static res. We've got a full command in there, so we've got a banner that gives us up to 4. We're close order 5. We probably outnumber the enemy 6, particularly if we're fighting knights. If we've got the Griffin banner, we get an extra 3 because we double our rank bonus, so we're up to 9. That's before battle standard bearers or anything like that start to come into the mix. So theoretically, we could get up to a static combat res of 11, which is massive. However, knights generally have the first charge rule, which means they're disrupting ranks and taking away that rank bonus in the first round of combat for the first time that they make a charge. So they go crashing in to our doughty warriors, who put aside their halberds, go sword and board for the first round of combat to maximize their armor save. It becomes a 4-up. Now, because of a lance having AP2, we're assuming there's AP, we're talking about knights here. Chaos with hand weapons, you're looking at -1, but it's still a small number, and you're probably not going to save much, if any, of the incoming damage. You're looking at well-armoured opponents, you're using swords, hand weapons, axes, you're not going to do an awful lot of damage back. You're depending very much on your static res to keep you in that engagement. What happens? Well, first charge has just taken away your rank bonus. So that 9 points without BSB, etc., suddenly becomes a 3 because you've lost your ranks, they're not being doubled, so you've got close order, so have they. You've got a banner, probably, so have they. You've got outnumber. You've got 1 point above your opponent, and they're going to rinse you on the casualties. So how do the detachments come into play here? Well, they can be used to shield your infantry. You can use them angled up to prevent people getting at first charge into your infantry block. Once they've wasted it, they're far more vulnerable because their horses are slightly blown, or whatever it is they're riding, and you're more likely to survive because you'll have that big number of static res. Talking of angling, there's another role as well for detachments. It's not just about how do we get pips of combat resolution in the engagement we're in. It can also be used to protect your flanks. Good positioning, good angling to stop enemy forces swinging around the side of your big blocks of infantry to again negate your advantages because they've hit you in the side, they've hit you in the rear. Your detachments can help shield your main body from that fate. So overall, what do I think? Well, I think it's looking like detachments are going to serve an awful lot of purposes. I don't think, as much as I want to use them, that state missile troops are going to be the way. I think we're very much looking at units of halberdiers, 1, possibly even 2 detachments to attach themselves to our main body of state troops and our great swords as well. I can see people having a lot of fun with this, and I can see them really amping up the potential of state troopers. Only time will tell, I think, once we start getting games in as to see how they operate in practice and how quickly people start working out ways of negating these smaller units of detachments. As I say, I think they're going to be pretty vulnerable to small arms fire, and given if we are going to move to a game which is more centric around slightly less well armored against against shooting attacks, infantry that aren't the true elite, small bodies of elite, we might see actually small arms fire coming more into the play, just for those pitter-patter of casualties to break down the blocks that don't want to be moving off objectives, making them vulnerable to later engagements. Anyway, that's just my thoughts on all things detachment. If you've got any comments or thoughts, do let me know down in the comments below. I hope you've enjoyed the video. I hope you found it useful. If so, do consider a like and subscribe. I've waffled on for long enough on this, so all that remains for me to say is thank you once again for listening. I am returned to the old world. Have a great day.